Greetings, communication colleagues. My name is Timothy Lampley, and this is my Fall 18 COM505 midterm project as assigned by our instructor and lead faculty member of the Master of Arts in Communications program, Dr. Sandra Romo. The title of this presentation is Communication Theory Map, a complementarian approach to communication theory comprehension. This submission will commence in the following order. First, I will provide a macro-level perspective on my communication theory map consisting of 7 hexagonal gears, corresponding with the 7 communication theory traditions as conceptualized by Dr. Robert T. Craig. Then, a brief survey regarding the properties of each tradition will be covered. Next, we will delve into this map at the micro level and explore 3 theories of influence that, in the author's opinion, typify the traditions that house them. Dr. Robert T. Craig, communication theorist from the University of Colorado, as a means of amalgamating the nebulous ether of communication theory, conceptualized its grand sum into 7 traditions. These traditions are called the semiotic, the phenomenological, the cybernetic, the socio-psychological, the socio-cultural, the critical, and lastly, the rhetorical traditions of communication theory. At the macro level, my map is composed of 7 hexagonal gears, as it were, that spin collectively in states of both friction and viscosity. The inspiration for my perspective comes from Dr. Craig within the following statement. There is no one, quote, no one correct theory of communication, but many theories are useful for thinking about specific problems. Most communication theories come from a small number of traditions representing fundamentally different practical approaches, unquote. Expressed another way, these theories, while providing structure, are not meant to produce a dogmatic template unable to withstand the flexion and contraction that communication theory and praxis discovery require to move and work. On the contrary, Craig states, quote, without question, these are instrumental constructions representing recognizable communities of scholarship, unquote. With appetites sufficiently kindled, let's move forward with the promised survey of each tradition. The semiotic tradition has the following primary conceptual units. Signs. Signs are defined as the stimulus designating or indicating some other condition, while symbols designate a complex sign with many meanings, including cultural and personal. The big idea behind this tradition is that communication is theorized as intersubjective mediation by signs and symbols. The next tradition is the phenomenological tradition, and the primary conceptual units are the individual. Quote, people give meaning to things through personal relationships with those things, unquote. The second conceptual unit would be experience. And the following statement here sheds some light on that. Quote, authentic communication is founded on the experience of direct, unmediated contact with others, unquote. According to Craig. The big idea behind this tradition is that communication is theorized as dialogue. Common ground is established through the direct experience of others. The cybernetic tradition has the following conceptual units. Systems. Systems are defined according to the tradition as sets of interacting components that together form something more than the sum of its parts. Self-regulation is the second unit. Now, systems monitor, regulate, and control their outputs to remain stable and achieve results. The big idea behind this tradition is that communication is theorized as information processing, with the goal of getting the most information across with the least amount of interference. The next tradition is titled the socio-psychological tradition, and the primary conceptual units are the individual human mind, which is defined according to the tradition as, quote, the locus for processing and understanding information. The second conceptual unit would be persuasion. Communication is the process by which individuals interact and influence each other, according to Craig. The big idea behind this tradition is that communication is theorized as expression, interaction, and influence. Cause and effect relationships can be discovered through careful, systematic observation. The sociocultural tradition has the following primary conceptual units. 1. Ethnography, which is defined according to the tradition as the observation of how actual social groups build meaning through their linguistic and non-linguistic behaviors, according to Littlejohn. The second conceptual unit would be the speech act, which is defined as the practical use of language. Now, the big idea behind this tradition is that communication is theorized as the reproduction of social order. Reality is constructed through micro-level interaction processes. The next tradition is the critical tradition. And the primary conceptual units is Marxism. Now, Marxism is actually considered the source of contemporary critical theory. And another conceptual unit, which is sort of a sub-unit, if you would be called the critique of political economy. Now, this is a concept taught by Marx, stating that the economy is the basis of all social structure. And the big idea behind this tradition is that communication is theorized as discursive reflection. Social justice can be restored when ideological distortions are recognized through communication practices that enable critical reflection. The last of the 7 traditions would be the rhetorical tradition. And the primary conceptual units are, of course, the creator of rhetoric, the medium of rhetoric, and the purpose of rhetoric. According to Foss, rhetoric is limited to human readers as the originators or creators of messages. Now, the medium of rhetoric includes speaking, writing, and nonverbal symbols. The purpose of rhetoric would be an invitation to understanding. And the big idea behind this tradition is that communication is theorized as the practical art of discourse, according to Dwyer. So let's move forward and look at the map from a micro level. So we'll look into the semiotic tradition, and within that we'll see 3 particular theories. The 3 semiotic tradition-based theories are symbolic convergence. Symbolic convergence theory is defined as, or as actually based on, 2 major assumptions. One is that communication creates reality, and the second is that symbols not only create reality for individuals, but that individuals' meanings for symbols can converge to create a shared reality or a community consciousness, according to Foss. In other words, interpretations of reality based on certain narratives and themes can intermingle into a collectively accepted perspective of the real. The second theory is symbolic interaction. As people interact with one another over time, they come to share meanings for certain terms and actions, and thus come to understand events in particular and similar ways. This theory, while sharing similarities with symbolic convergence, focuses on the interaction that precedes, or better yet, facilitates the convergence. The next one would be materiality of nature. So, as stated within the context of rhetoric and its creators, the traditional outlook is that humanity alone is the creator of communication. This, according to this theory, condescends nature below the perceived rank and worth of humanity. This theory seeks to elevate nature to the same plane as humans, as stated by the following quote. Quote, "The central agenda has been to work to create a space for nature as an active participant in shaping human perceptions, experiences, and definitions of reality, unquote. Within the phenomenological tradition, the following three theories are surveyed. The first one is communication apprehension. Communication apprehension, nested within trait-based theories, this area investigates the communicator's experience with anxiety associated with oral communication, colloquially known as stage fright. Although trait apprehension transcends that typical experience, it moves further to consider those whose anxiety would prevent them from several methods of communication and numerous tactics of avoidance. Co-cultural is the second theory, and it regards communicative interactions with different demographics, particularly underrepresented cultural groups. These are defined as co-cultural in that they are considered outside the dominant culture. Determining the nature of those conversations, analyzing them, and then seeking solutions to persuade and therefore make change are the goals of this theory. The last theory would be relational prayer as rhetoric. Based upon the precepts of interpersonal communication, relational prayer explores prayer as a communication phenomenon between people and the object of their worship. The types of communication between worshipers and the divine are talking to God, listening, dialoguing with God, meditation, contemplation, and mystical union. Three cybernetic tradition-based theories are actor network theory, where materiality of nature works to promote value and equality of nature with humanity. Actor network theory has developed into the quintessential interaction or connectivity between humans and non-human objects. Media equation is the second theory. This theory suggests that we respond to and react to communication media the same way we do to actual people. Examples of this, for instance, would be when one bumps their head on a cabinet and then begins to yell at the cabinet, attributing to the inanimate object the cause of the injury and therefore treating it as if it were capable of receiving the terrain. The third theory in this tradition is media dependency. This theory, in summary, very simply, describes the environment in which increasing dependence on media in its various forms ensues. Within the socio-psychological tradition, we have the following three theories. Interaction adaptation. This theory considers how communicative agents can engage in a dynamic dialogue, where the traditional concept of monodirectional transmission of a message to its recipient, who acknowledges, receives, processes, and then responds to the source, is replaced by the more contemporary rationale of a bidirectional, continual processing and reply to ongoing participation. Once again, bidirectionally. The next theory is uncertainty reduction. Uncertainty reduction theory investigates how those unfamiliar with a person take steps to ease their suspicions or lack of trust before easing their concerns and changing the manner of communication, both discursive and nonverbal, with the person. How one deals with strangers, for instance, and the methods one uses to become familiar with the other is important here. The last theory within this tradition is expectancy violation. Expectancy violation theory predicts that ambiguous behavior by an unrewarded communicator will be taken as negative. That's a quote from Little John. Put another way, when a person transgresses against certain norms, the tendency is to look at the offender in a negative light. The sociocultural tradition states the presentation of self. So this theory gives much credence to communication creating reality, as this focuses on how one may use different inspirations to portray an image of oneself not typically associated with them. Cultural identity shares many similarities with presentation of self theory, and are indeed components of it. Cultural identity are associated with membership in a particular culture or social group. Identity negotiation. This theory considers the way that people negotiate with the tension between personal and cultural identities. People are able to navigate this tension with varying success. Three critical tradition-based theories are contemporary critical. At the heart of critical theory is the idea that social and cultural arrangements enforce the power of certain stakeholders in ways that dominate and oppress others, according to Littlejohn. From this perspective, the role of communication in society requires thinking of how communication relates to work and production, according to Holzer. In other words, investigating this one can determine the social injustices that are present in the system and how to incite liberation from these oppressive constructs. Feminist theory. This can be further segmented into two aspects. These are known as liberal and radical feminism, respectively, according to Littlejohn. The first seeks equality for both men and women, and therefore reform the current model, whereas the latter, radical feminism, sees the current system as inherently flawed and can only be remedied by its destruction and bringing into being a new paradigm. The last theory here is queer. So the queer theory seeks to trouble the categories of sexuality and identity by showing them to be social constructions in discourse rather than essential biological categories. And last, we have the rhetorical tradition. So, three rhetorical tradition-based theories are invitational rhetoric. Perceived as the antithesis of persuasion, this theory disagrees with the idea that the purpose of communication is to persuade. Alternatively, this non-aggressive means of engaging in communication may be more effective than that over the attempts of persuasion. Prayer as rhetoric. In this theory, quote, prayer is part of rhetoric or communication because it is a particular use of language for persuasive purposes. It consists of four primary aims: petition, praise, thanksgiving, and confession, according to Littlejohn. The last theory here is the animate rhetoric. Animate rhetoric is primarily concerned with the intersection between humans and other fauna kind. It considers humans as another form of animal and seeks to investigate the connection between them. Thank you again for this wonderful opportunity to explore with you my communication map based on the 7 traditions of communication theory.